Good evening, everyone. It is currently February 10th, 2010, which means we are actually live this time instead of it just being a good old recording. This is Day 9, daily number 66, I think. I hope it's number 66. I just want to double check that. Yes, it's day number 66. Today we're doing just the normal thing. We're doing a nice little analysis of Really versus Perfectman. It was totally kick-ass. I'm actually going to write that in the chat right now. Of live streams. That way people who tune in late can find out what's up. Really versus Perfectman on match point. So, I loved this game. It was this unbelievably suave, sexy tactic by Really that I was super into. I want to talk a little bit about, because what's so sweet is that after, however many years it's been since StarCraft was released, it's going to be like 11 or 12, because that's how long I've been playing. Still more tactics are coming out. And when I say tactic, I mean like a little small nugget, like a 30-second or under experience. So like a tactic is, doing or defensive matrixing a Marine and running it past a lurker so that way it can stay alive. And draw the fire of the lurker and all your other Marines can kill it. Really cool tactic, but that's not the strategy. That's not the underlying strategy, So a lot of people are still coming up with new clever little twists on strategy, but it's rare that we see new tactics emerge, like completely unknown things. And what we're going to see here is medics with blind being used really, really, really effectively. So, I thought it would be a great example of how to incorporate these sorts of tactics into your play while still having a fundamentally sound strategy. Because with StarCraft 2 right around the corner, what lots of people are going to do and what they're going to screw up is they're going to obsess about tactics and they're not going to think, how do I make the rest of my play really solid as well? And I think that's a super important thing for StarCraft, but who cares about StarCraft now that we know that the beta is coming out this month for StarCraft 2? So we're going to transition right over to the main game. Just got to briefly rearrange some things. Things got delayed by about 30 seconds or so because of technical difficulties, which means in this period of time, I'll relate something kind of funny that happened to me where someone showed me something and was like, okay, you can't tell anyone this, all right? And I was like, oh, okay. And it was so awesome that I got on the stream and I was like, oh my god, I can't break this NDA, oh my god, it's totally NDA breaking if I reveal this information, At which point everyone thought that I had, privileged information on StarCraft 2, and I want to let you know, not quite, so, actually not quite, more like, no, I literally know nothing about StarCraft 2, which is why all of you should tune in tomorrow, because I'm doing an analysis of a StarCraft 2 video. Again, notice how I talked about tactics today, and the underlying strategies relating everything together, and how it applies to StarCraft 2. Those are the exact sorts of things we're going to be talking about, but not in an abstract sense. We're actually going to be looking directly at a game. So let's transition over to the main screen. This is the gentleman who has the suave, sexy, unbelievable tactic that we're going to see today. But first we have to just briefly look at the map. All I want to do is do some big strokes. We don't want to paint in specifics and details. We want to paint in big, broad strokes, right? So let's just do that. What's the defining features of this map that I see? Well, there's a whole lot of curvy, different paths going around. No real well-defined center. I mean, technically we'd say that this is the center, but I mean there's no real center of movement. You could equally likely attack along this path, or up along this path. So that's the first one. The second one is that these little areas right by the natural threaten a lot of storm drops, a lot of tank pushes. Just in general, this is a pretty important area. This is also a pretty important area, it looks like. Helps us control these back two expansions. Getting control of this one, I call this the high ground pod. And the last one, really, is that if I'm on this half, these are my minerals, these are my opponent's minerals, but there's generally contention over these top and bottom mineral spots. So, I think it's pretty important just to mention those, because Terran will be doing a lot of splitting this way and cutting Protoss off from these two expansions and trying to win a war of attrition, basically. My 4 patches are more efficient than your 4 patches. There, we've already described a little bit of strategy. Protoss is going to try to get control of this early to prevent Terran from expanding here. Okay, we're thinking about this pod and that sort of thing. What we're going to see Really do is he's going to look at something very subtle. He's going to look at this center area and realizes that this center area really allows Protoss to move through all these regions pretty freely, if he can control that center area. I'm going to come back to that quite a bit, so we're going to get some stats. Okay, awesome. So let's begin with a happy Korean couple that we see right there. Oh, and let me briefly say, if you're watching this and it's currently February 10th, there's also the NBC Star League matches on right now. MST Group 1, I think it is, going on today. MST Group A. So My apologies for scheduling on top of that. You should watch me and that at the same time. Ooh, but, turn off the other guy's volume because I speak English. Oh, what an advantage I have. So everything's starting off normally as can be, and I'm knocking things off my desk, such as my new glasses. Make me look very intellectual, very Clark Kentish. Already we're liking some things. We noticed that scouting SCV came down first. It just popped down and then pulled right back. Those are sorts of things that you see that sometimes might not be explained well or might seem mysterious. Really, what's the way that a lot of people would explain it is they would say, well, what Terran did is he scouted here for a proxy, and then he knows that there's no proxy, so he came home. That's almost it. It's really subtle, the difference between it. What really was doing was that when he practiced his normal build, he kept losing to proxy gates. Therefore, he thought, what adjustment can I make? Do I need to build my barracks earlier? Do I need to build my barracks closer in towards my command center? Do I need to have some cute placement with my barracks and my supply depot? Do I need to scout it early? And based upon all those options, he chose the scouting early. And the reason I made that a little bit more long-winded than was perhaps necessary was the fact that you should think of all little adjustments of your play in the same light. You should encounter a problem and say, what tiny little adjustment can I make that won't throw everything off? What tiny adjustment can I make in order to hold off that that strategy that you're losing to? So in this case, the tiny little adjustment was to send the SCV there and pull it right back. Look at how small that was. I'm going to have an SCV stop mining for a little bit. No big deal. And this Marine coming out might be the same sort of thing. Might be trying to be aggressive early on because he sees the Nexus, but just to throw it out there, you could potentially send your first Marine out just a little bit early to kill a scouting probe and then pull back. Little things like that I want to be pieces for consideration. So it really looks like he's doing the usual aggressive thing, trying to do some damage to this early. There are a lot of ways that you can deal with Nexus on 14. One of which is to just do these little obnoxious antics with one Marine, like run around here and try to kill probes off. So right now this is 3 probes not mining, and a Marine that's not too big of a deal to make early on. You'd probably want to make that early on anyways. This is cute. Oh, the Manor Pylon. Oh, you can lift it off. Oh, too bad he didn't look up the tech tree. And an excellent response by Really. So a lot of Terran players tend to do one of two things against an early expanding player like this. One is that they just do their normal build anyways. They just turtle up super hard, expand, no big deal. The other is to do an ultra-aggressive bunker rush. But we're Really doing a mix between those where he's actually expanding like a normal Protoss should. Or a normal Terran should. Just expanding very early, getting a Vulture out really early. Think a little bit about what the possible deficiencies of your opponent's play is. So with early expanding, we're going to get this spot set up real nicely. We need our 2 gateways for Dragoons. Then we're going to be, defended at the front. We're going to be defended over here. We're feeling happy, but we don't really have detection at all. We can't rush for detection necessarily either, because if we rush for detection, we're too low on units, so we're going to lose to an early push. In other words, if you early expand as Protoss, the sacrifice you make is that you are in the dark. You can't scout exactly what your opponent's doing. So we like to exploit that a little bit with mines. We know that we can plant mines right here. Our Protoss opponent can't scout too early on because he has to defend, and then at the points when Protoss is comfortable scouting, there are mines there. So he must wait for observers. And this Dragoon repelling it. Excellent placement. I already really like this. Instead of just having units right here, we're seeing Perfectman plant some units here and up there on the high ground. Fantastic. And building the pylon as a spotter. Of course, many people know this, but a lot of people tend to forget little things like that. Again, this pylon is a spotter. Don't think of it just as I'm building a pylon so that I can, worry about drops. Instead, think of it the other way. In this build that I'm doing, I'm having trouble spotting drops. How do I do it? Is planting it right here, planting a pylon right here at the edge of my base sufficient? Maybe not. Maybe I need to build a pylon over here or a pylon up here. We've seen players do that. They're not doing that on a whim. They're doing it because of some motivation that they found during practice. And a nice little Dragoon push. See the mines coming out a little bit late. It's already kind of getting a chance to push. But, you get the idea. Most Protosses aren't as proactive as Perfectman. about, positioning stuff here and here early on and then starting to try to crunch forward. But still, basic idea of getting the mines very quickly. It's excellent. And that second mine planted ultra fast. Dude, I don't know how it's possible that only one thing survived from that. Or excuse me, that only one SCV and Marine died there. But man, that was pretty nice mining. Also, look at this planting right in the attack path. Hey, look at what we're exploiting. The fact that our opponent... Oh yeah, look at all this death that occurred right there. Super scary what mines can do early on. So yeah, Perfectman did get to push out early. And Really's build was more to prevent him from pushing out, but look how well it dealt with an early attack from the Protoss. Yeah, see, look, the Robo Bay is only just now started. Holy crap. Oops. Yeah, so I mean, all that sort of stuff is why exactly what Really did is an excellent play. So again, just to sort of reemphasize that, since everything normal's happening, getting the extra gateways for the extra Dragoons, especially after he's lost his army, adding on more gateways always has a much stronger motivation. But yeah, so Protoss, who early expands, you can try to hit it early on with just sort of a huge attack with a bunch of SCVs and Marines with bunkering and vultures and that sort of thing. Because early on it doesn't quite have units and it doesn't quite have Dragoons with range yet. Alternatively, you can rush for mines, which is exactly what we saw Really did, and he's able to really seize control of the map. Really is really good. And see, there's another spotter thing. Maybe it was this game that I was thinking of, where I saw the pylons being placed. But I love these creative, subtle adjustments that players make in order to prevent them from losing to things that they have been losing to. That's really the key to, developing yourself as a strong StarCraft player, is those little tiny adjustments. Most players, even at the C minus level, are pretty good about knowing the structure of their play from, start to finish. They have a pretty good idea if they should be getting Arbiters late game in Terran vs. Protoss. They should be expanding about now and this sort of thing. But it's all those little things that prevent the dumb losses, like maybe this sort of attack that many Protosses might not be used to. So, I mean, like, for instance, right here, backing it up. And what Terran's doing right now is a very easy sort of early push where you have one factory with add-on, and you get a handful of tanks, so you get a second factory without add-on, and you try to do a little bit of magic with it early. And so many Dragoons are being added on. And as a general sort of thing to think about, I don't want to say it's a rule, so I'm going to dance around the term. Whenever you do a big mid-game push or even an early game push, players tend to just think, all right, I have some stuff, and go! And then they literally sprint to their opponent's base and try to just pound it apart as quickly as possible. That's not quite. I mean, it's the right idea to be moving out really aggressively, but almost all the time, there's this halting point. So, in other words, this push from Really, we normally see it sprint to about here, and then the battle from here to here is really long and arduous. So with any of your mid-game pushes, you should think of where you're sprinting to, and then gently advance from that point forth. Sometimes this mid-game push might actually move up here, and then might slowly push down this way. Or maybe might set up here, might work up to the pod, and then down and around. It's a very, very important concept, because if you try to be too fast with your push, try to get in his face too early on, you just won't have enough stuff and you'll die, and you'll be doing stuff that's way too risky. A lot of times what a mid-game push is trying to do is exploit some sort of position. So, classic example is the Terran player who pushes to a position where he can build a bunker, and then he builds a bunker, and he sort of works from there. So it looks like Really saw something that motivated him to back up. Planting some mines, usual sort of stuff. Generally, when you do this two-factory stuff, if you stay two-factory, you have enough time to get another command center in there. And just doing some fantastic harassment with his Vultures. Oh yeah, there's the command center. Oh, feeling smart. And going ahead and killing everything off. Everything seems pretty nice and normal. Noticing that about now is when the Protoss player had the opportunity to get those Vultures. Oh yeah, we seeing medics. Oh baby, baby, baby. Bam! Getting medics, getting blind. So that's very cool, and we'll talk about that when it ends up coming up. But still, let's ignore that tactic, the mines with blind. Here's some nice fancy stuff going on with the vultures. But let's just think back to what's going on in Terran base. He did this 2-factory opening, advanced forward, pulled back, and is now getting a command center. Standard and by the book as they come. So normal what is happening right now from the Terran point of view. But Terran's also throwing in the blind. So see, he's thinking of how can I do this normal tactic that I want to do anyways? Or excuse me, do this normal strategy that I'd want to do anyways, do this normal sort of push out and take my third base sort of quickly, and then incorporate this extra little tactic. And of course, Perfectman's doing everything nice and well as he should. He's expanding again, he's adding on a bunch of Dragoons, still looks like he's on 4 gateways, probably getting speed for Zealots about now. And the 4 factory count, another really standard thing. 4 factories, 2 with add-on, 2 without, right about the time that you're taking your third, very, very normal. But here we see the medics charging forward. And the observers going in. And then all these mines get planted in the center. And a medic just hangs out. What's going to happen is anytime the mines start dying, that medic is going to blind the observer. Now that's the sort of tactic that you think of the first day you buy StarCraft and you feel so clever. And literally all of your games involve massing vultures and medics and giggling whenever anything runs into a mine before you lose, because you didn't relate anything back to some sort of underlying strategy or underlying focus. So in adding on, oh look, 6 factories, now that the second is sort of established, and getting the armory has the right look, has the look of a strong Terran play. So Terran's going to be keeping an eye on this medic. Oh yeah, look at this, blind. Or blound, whatever the past tense of blind is. He blound him. So this is a blound medic, or a blound observer. I know it's blinded, but I'm going to say blound. So this is a blound observer, and what I love so much about this is it's a nice way to control the middle. All of a sudden, you have freedom to move your vultures around and everything. You don't have to worry about Dragoons being like here and here, so you have to take these stupid roundabout paths. This center control is allowing these vultures at the top to have so much more freedom. Now, this is the one thing that I want to do right now. Let's stop for a minute and think beyond just the tactic itself. Just beyond the, oh, if his observer's blound, he can't kill my mines with Dragoons. Think one step beyond that. What does this mean? It means that the Protoss has to spend more money and more time on observers. Okay, seems reasonable. But the one thing I want to take one step farther is that the Protoss player has to spend more gas than he wants to doing what he would normally do anyways. How much gas does an upgrade cost? Well, +1 attack is 100 gas. If you can force your opponent to make 1 observer, suddenly a Protoss who had that as part of his build can't do that anymore. If you can blind 3, 4, 5 observers, which actually ends up happening, that means that's what? So 4 observers, that's 300 gas that your Protoss opponent has just got shot down the drain. And what was the cost for Terran? Like 50 gas. And I'm going to do the gas comparison because minerals are you have a little bit more leeway with, but gas, you're pretty strict with how you need to be spending your gas in your build. And what we saw really do is he's delayed when he's getting his factory, and he has, in particular, delayed his armory. Those are all the little adjustments he made to get that observer. And by the way, there's the blind cost, which is not too much gas compared to the loss the Protoss is going to get. So this means that all the things like the upgrades and the arbiters get super delayed just by this wonderful little tactic that we're going to see right here. How cool is that? So we have 1 blound observer. And look at the freedom these vultures have. Oh, hooray. So kick-ass. And it's kind of funny because a lot of Protoss players stop making observers at a certain point in time. And psychologically, it's weird when you suddenly, those 4 observers that you built all the time anyways, has been cut down to like 2 observers. Or 1 observer. There's another observer that's bound to be blound. Get him. Yeah, so see, these mines are going to start getting killed off. Oh, I have an easy fix for this. Hey, there we go. Run away, medic. Yeah, look how awesome that was. Still 1 medic has been able to blind 2 observers. So, Protoss, psychologically, it feels uncomfortable to add on more observers. And a lot of players will just go, what? He casts blind, And then they just go back to their robotics facility and they spam observers without really thinking through the big effects it's going to have on their build. So, they'll generally spend an extra 150 making 2 more observers because they're kind of going to, catch on to the idea and try to stop it ahead of time. And that's a pretty big dent into the overall plans of Protoss. And again, look at the freedom that these vultures get. Look how aggressively he's pushing in. Those vultures never get that sort of freedom in a traditional Terran vs. Protoss. That is so cool. So look, medics with blind, vultures doing harassment they'd normally do, and then some. And meanwhile, the Terran player, look, is expanding to the bottom right. How easy was that to expand to the bottom right? Notice that I had all my focus elsewhere. I had all my focus on this sort of stuff going on right here. And in fact, this is where the Protoss' focus is too. So the Terran just, no problem, expanding right there to the bottom. And the Mind manages to go off. Pretty big tank army getting massed up. So we are currently at the 12-minute mark in the game, and this is really the first time the Protoss has actually been comfortable advancing into the middle of the map. So, in my opinion, if I'm Terran right now, I am feeling like my medics at exactly this point in the game have more than paid off for their initial investment. Because I got all that center control, I got to do the harassment, but in the grand scheme of things, when we look at the minimap, me, the Terran, I have all my 4 expansions on my right side, and the Protoss has only just gotten his 4 expansions up as well. That's always awful for Protoss when you're about even with your opponent in terms of when you're expanding. So, super good. Getting another one. I think that's the 5th or the 6th, at least. And there's another medic valiantly trooping into battle. I always wonder, because it's really funny. Okay, look, target firing the medic. That has to be one of my absolute favorite things to see. Like, seriously, play a game of StarCraft and pick a weird unit. Like, if you're Protoss, make a Scout, whatever. If you're, make a Dark Archon, or if you're Terran, make a Ghost. When players see the unit that they're not comfortable seeing, they'll target fire it. So, I remember I was playing a Zerg vs. Terran, and I had 2 queens, and I had 4 lurkers, which is really not so many lurkers. I screwed up. Look, I'm awful, alright? I only had 4 lurkers, so I had a bunch of Zerglings, though. And this Terran player, if he had just irradiated 2 of the lurkers, he would have had a big medic marine army against my 2 remaining lurkers, because 2 had died to irradiate, and then a bunch of Zerglings, and he would have been fine. But instead he saw the 2 queens and irradiated the 2 queens because he was just uncomfortable with it. It's just this weird, wacky sort of thing. So that's something that I would try to be aware of in your own play, that when you see something unpredictable, don't just try to straight up kill it. Spend, just an extra 3 seconds trying to make sure that may or may not be the best decision. And of course in StarCraft 2, which is coming out, where so much is unfamiliar, spend a little bit of extra time right there trying to see if what you're going to do is the right decision. And then afterwards, of course, analyze and say, what should I have done? And eventually things will start to smooth out. And since we're at about the viewer peak, since we're at about 500 viewers, I just want to reiterate that tomorrow I'm doing a StarCraft 2 game analysis. We're going to be looking at one of the battle reports between the one that Dustin Browder broadcasts, shoutcasts with one of his coworkers whose name escapes me right now. So that should be all fine and fancy and well and good. And yeah, see, there's the Stargate. Kind of a late Stargate. Normally, Protosses are getting the Observer just a touch earlier. Just a nib earlier. And it's all because of those mines. Yeah, see, I'm going to rewind this, and I want you just to listen, okay? Okay, so we're going to go in first-person shot. Coming up any second now. Okay, listen. Did you hear that noise? That was an Observer that just finished. Like, we are so far into the game, and this Protoss is still spamming Observers. Look at all these little speckled dots here. There's one Observer. There's actually 3 more here. I don't know if you can see that too well. But there are 4 total live Observers that have been blowned. And look at the Vultures, still having freedom to move around. Where's the Protoss army stuck? At right here, right on this high ground pot. Protoss is forced to be right up there. Weird. Never happens in most games. There's another blowned Observer. trying valiantly to push forward. And look, this observer that we're seeing Perfectman pull out was the observer that was in Reilly's base, pulling it out just so we can get to the center. And look, making yet more observers. So now trying to advance forward, and there's not that much that you can really do about this. Except for perhaps that. So here's a circumstance where I would be more than comfortable target firing the medic and just killing it right away. But in that Vulture versus medic push, I found it sort of humorous, the fact that the Protoss player just target fired the medic in the midst of all the Vultures shooting at him. So now this push has a much easier time advancing forward. So I just want to state that for the record, Terran has not been touched this game. There's been no big pushes at the front, except for that one minor one that was happening right at the natural. But the mines cleared that out. And from that point on, there's been no pushes. There's been absolutely no pressure on Terran. Terran has gotten to do whatever he wants. Thank you, Blind. You kick ass. It really makes me start to rethink the way this matchup can work. Because traditionally you say, the Protoss has complete map control. Protoss gets to move where Protoss wants, and Terran has to fight for it. But with the medics, wow, that was a significant twist in the map control that went on. And how did Reilly take advantage of it? He did what he was going to do anyways, which was to take his half of the map and get a really giant-ass army. But it was magnified in effectiveness by a whole bunch because of these medics. And here comes the good old push. All the tanks siege up, all the medics continuing to hang out. Maybe you just want to blind an Arbiter just because it's funny. This, I think, is a testament to Perfectman's phenomenal macro. The fact that he's able to withstand this so hard, or so well. He's withstanding it hard. Sorry, I need to work on my ability to say English that makes sense. So, you know, good spot for Terran to be in. Still sort of same theory we have going on that we were mentioning earlier in the game. When you push, you sort of sprint to a location set up and then have this arduous battle to where you want to go. Same thing right there. Big push happened. Generally, you don't quite see that look when you're doing a big maxed endgame army push, because you have this huge army that gets in a big fight, and you either crush your opponent or you get crushed. You know, so most of the time, like in this circumstance, it looks like he crushed Perfectman pretty bad, so he's able to move forward very freely. With most early mid-game pushes, it's not exactly the case. So here's a gentle example of this. Terran's going to have to siege up a little bit here. But again, for mid-game pushes, you want to do that little sprint to where you're in a good spot, and then slowly work your way forward. My God, look at how straightforward this game was for the Terran. The mine's doing something. Oh, I love that. He just target fires the mine. Ooh, nice stasis. So, I mean, very, very simple stuff going on here. Every Terran player, I think, knows how to push here. You know, just get in good position. Don't advance too far down the high ground. Really just get one or two tanks within shooting range of the Nexus and then just hang out. Very standard. You don't want to lose control of this high ground pod. And notice now how I'm returning back to the more standard stuff. I've made such a big deal about this blind Vulture stuff. And right up to this point in the game, or excuse me, right at this point in the game, I'm just talking about the normal stuff. I'm just saying, oh look, remember that thing we identified at the start of the game? How important these high ground pods are? Well, here's an example of it. We're planting tanks and Vultures here, shooting down at this Nexus. Now we can easily go up to this Nexus. We don't want to push down into the main. We can just hold control of this. And how is he going to stop us from killing that? Very typical, very standard stuff. Look, planting, we're right up there on the ridge, so that way he's going to have a little bit of trouble firing with his Dragoons to kill it off. Ooh, good mine drag. Planting more mines. Planting in between the path. This is not really a big attack. It's obviously, you know, harass. But it's those tanks that really define where the push is. And those tanks are pretty much going to stay very still up on that high ground. Not going to advance too far down. And this is the point where if you're Terran, you want to send 3 Vultures and 1 tank to the top left location. Slowly kill that off. Yeah, so the Vulture is advancing forward, taking losses on the Vultures, no big deal, because I think Reilly has like 15 factories or something. Very cool play. Very, very suave use of a tactic to bolster normal play. Yeah, look how many Vultures that is. 2 tanks, 5 gajillion Vultures. Yeah, look, 3 tanks. Just going up to the top. Dead expansion. Controlling the high ground pod. Excellent. This is crisis management. Oh, my Protoss is trying to counterattack me. All I gotta do is hold this off, and then I'm fine, because I'm controlling his high ground pod, and he's just dead broke out of money. Yeah, normal as can be. And, you know, I'm just going to go ahead and slowly skip forward. I mean, Perfectman's going to fight a little bit, but, you know, good game. There we go. So I'm going to unmute chat, and I'll happily take questions for 10, 15 minutes here and entertain everyone's new ideas with their tactics. So feel free to both ask me questions about this game in particular, or to say something like, I'm interested in trying blah. What do you think about it? And, you know, you don't necessarily have to vomit into your keyboard there. So here we go. Jazriel says, for a D plus Zerg, is it a good idea to focus on macro instead of worrying about creating an army and micro it? Is it good just to practice macro mechanics and basically attack, move, and spam? I think I mentioned this in a podcast a little bit, and because I want to relate it back to this whole tactics thing, I definitely would focus on your fundamentals. I would focus on, you know, just being able to macro and spam really well. I wouldn't word it so much as, I'm not going to micro, I'm going to ignore microing and just macro. I would instead put it as, if you're in a situation where you have to choose between micro and macro, choose macro because it makes learning very easy. If you're in a battle where you have 10 or you have 1,000 in the bank, a lot of times you'll go, I have no idea. Oops, I have to ban someone, and he's banned forever. There we go. A lot of times you will, if you have 1,000 in the bank, you get in a battle, it's hard to say, well, did I lose that because I didn't have enough stuff? Did I lose it because of my strategy? Did I lose it because of my control? However, if you're executing everything perfectly and you're dead broke and you get into a huge battle and you get crushed, you can definitively say, oh, there's something wrong with my strategy, and then you can adjust things a lot better. So, you know, definitely micro if you can. Don't just, you know, tell your mules to attack and fold your arm and be like, go mutas, you know, do a little bit of micro. So let's go ahead and take a handful of questions coming back to this. So trying to find some ones that relate back to the macro. Oh, this is awesome. Shotcoder asks, how effective are ghosts with lockdown for defending recalls? That's fantastic. Oh, by the way, if you're asking a question, do it in some bright fluorescent color so I see it. So for recalls with arbiters, I would say, so there's a few things you have to consider. What are ways to stop recall? List out all the possible ways to stop recall. There are ghosts with lockdown. There are science vessels to EMP things. There are just plain old turrets to defend it. Turrets we obviously have an issue with because sometimes they just don't kill the Arbiter in time. With science vessels, it's nice because you can float around everywhere you want to go. So for instance, you can have your science vessel, you can see the Arbiter and just kind of float to the edge of your base, EMP it, and float right on back. They have that mobility there. Ghosts tend to be a little bit more fixed. So what I would say is that if you are, for instance, nuking, if you're doing something else that bolsters the effectiveness of ghosts, if you are using ghosts in the battle to lock down the shuttles, I like that as well too. So what I would say is think a little bit more about how you are going to make use of the ghosts in other circumstances. And then I think then you'll be okay. Trying to line exactly one unit up to one response can be a little bit problematic. You know, if you're just doing something like, oh, I'm just going to make ghosts to deal with lockdown, then you're pretty much just burning gas. So I like the idea with the shuttles. I'm trying to think of anything else I could mention. Shuttles or arbiters right there in the battle seem like the most useful thing, because the shuttle, you can't possibly do anything to a shuttle with a science vessel. I mean, you can remove its shields, but the Templar are still going to pop out and do a whole bunch of damage. So yeah, let's go ahead and take a handful more questions regarding that. I hope that was sufficient. Let's see here. Oh, wait, I'm just going to go ahead and issue some bans coming out here. There we go. I mean, there's a lot of questions here. I want to make sure we get some that relate back to this tactic. So while I'm just glancing for some, I would think about queens a little bit. I'm just going to mention that. What I like about queens is that it happens on the way to the hive. So, for instance, you don't necessarily have to slow down on your build. You can sort of incorporate. You can actually delay that hive a little bit. Just throw down the queen's nest, get some ensnare, that sort of thing. And just use a big mid-game army to defend the mid-game pushes instead of rushing for Defiler always to deal with the mid-game pushes. And then, once you have your big hive tech, the Ensnare is still useful throughout the entire game. Your queens are also very mobile. A lot of times you can't really get the Overlord speed upgrade. And if you have queens, you can dart all over the map and get perfect vision on where your opponent's army is. So we're thinking of more uses for queens instead of just, I will ensnare, you know. And that I like quite a bit. So I'm going to take this question from Austin. So Austin says, if I see my opponent making a medic at an odd time, and I think he's getting blind, should I upgrade Observer Speed? You know, I don't actually think that's going to be that big of an issue. I don't think the speed is what is preventing the Protoss from really taking control. I think it's just that you can't really get to the medic in time. What I would recommend is actually making use of Speed Zealots to suicide in that mineral patch. When I was watching this game, when I saw Perfectman suicide that Dragoon into all of Ridley's mines, that seemed like the most effective way to deal with it. So I like that as a choice quite a bit. I do like the way that thought process happened. Like, well, should I get Observer Speed so I can dart sort of back and forth? One thing I would actually say is perhaps Observer sight range might be better than Observer speed, because then you can see the mines from a longer distance away and push forward with the Dragoons. And yeah, that might actually work. Hee-haw! Let's see. More tactics. People asking people asking about macro. I'll go ahead and take one of these. So people are saying, I can't seem to improve my actions per minute past 160. I tried to do what you suggested to force yourself to spam, but what I need is very specific guidelines. Spam. Spam, damn it. When you're not doing anything, 5-6, 5-6, 5-6, 5-6. I recommend against 1-2, 1-2, because everyone can do that. Like 1-5, 1-5, 1-5, 1-5 spamming. And literally, that is the advice I have. I mean, the fact is, if you force yourself to really get your APM high, I mean, like, get your APM to, like, 400. I mean, like, really try hard to spam, and your play's actually going to be pretty awful. When you're spamming that much, you're actually going to forget to do things every now and again. And what will slowly happen is that because you're focusing so hard on spamming, you will slowly begin to do your other actions more quickly. And then after a while, you realize that you're just doing actions very, very, very quickly. So what I would recommend is spend 30 or 40 games spamming. I think people tend to have a little bit of timeline issues whenever they're working on things. A lot of people try 3 or 4 games doing something, and they're like, it's not working. In StarCraft, you need to do like 50, 60, 70 games of one thing to really get a good hang of it and to get a feel for it. So spam for 40 or 50 games. Record what your APM is before that 40 and 50 games. And then, in the 40 or 50 period, you should be up in the 300s or so. And then afterwards, play normally without spamming. And then watch your APM. And you'll be like, whoa, I improved by like 40 or 50. I know it happened for me exactly that way. So, for me, it was actually 2.5 weeks of spamming relentlessly in my games. And I'm like a huge machine player. I like sit down and hardcore it out. So I would definitely recommend that. So Do the Evolution says, this medic strategy looks heavily dependent on the map. This medic strategy looks like it depends on the map. So is it that there's multiple exits for the Terran to run around and out of the base with vultures? I think it's that if you plant a minefield, you can control sort of a limited space. Like if we go over to the main screen, we'll see here that in the middle, we can plant mines and have a medic literally in the direct center of the map, and just cover everything without that big of a deal. I think that is pretty straightforward to cover that area. Imagine for a moment if we're on Python where we have this huge area. It's going to be really hard to prevent that. So I think that I would say it's less that there's more pathways and more that they're narrow pathways. If this was a map that had one really narrow small center, I definitely think the Terran could do the exact same thing. Just plant a bunch of mines there. Amoeba says, in Reilly's match against Zhangbi, he used blind first to blind shuttles. Is this alone enough to make up for the cost of medics? Ooh, that's a great question. Wow, forgot about that one. Yeah, if you blind a shuttle, you have no idea how to micro your Dragoon and Reaver drop properly. That's a fantastic technique to do. I would actually say that just might. What I would also say is, if you see a shuttle, don't go, whoop, time to get medics. If you're in a build where you've already gotten the early academy because you have the early scan, then you can get medics. Or get medics with the intention of using the early scan for some other purpose. So you're noticing that the way I'm responding to this is that I'm also considering the other stuff that the medics do and that the medics imply, the same way that I talked about the ghosts. You know, like if you get ghost to prevent arbiter recall, also think about ghosts against shuttles in the mid-game push. So here, I would actually say, yeah, as long as the rest of your build's feeling really good, I think that is a fantastic counter to the shuttle with Reaver stuff. And you can even make a double argument for it and say, well, not only am I holding off the shuttle and this Reaver really well just by blinding the shuttle, but also in the mid-game, I can plot my medic in the center and do tons of vulture harass really effectively. So I like that quite a bit. So here's a question that I like by UEU, it's YUI, or YUI, and it's a damn good question. Asks, what do you think about Terran vs. Protoss Ghosts and Goliaths against carriers? I've thought about that one a long time. What do I think about that? So the first thing I say is that if we're getting all these ghosts, we are low on gas, right? We're cutting into our gas. We're not going to have quite so many Goliaths, but we're going to have more vultures. And this is sort of okay, because theoretically our ghosts are going to be able to lock down the carriers, so we don't need quite as many Goliaths. What do I think about that? I would also say that it requires like a really huge amount of bases to do properly. So for instance, if the Protoss is doing something like has taken 3 bases and is going carriers all of a sudden, and you're on 2 bases Terran, I think it would actually be bad to get the ghosts, because it eats too much into everything, and you'll have some Goliaths to deal with the carriers, but the real issue is the ground army that comes to back up the Protoss. That's the real thing I'm thinking about. So for instance, if we were playing on match point, like let's actually go to the map that I have loaded up. If I'm Terran and I have this half of the map, and my Protoss buddy has this half of the map and is going carriers, I like getting ghosts in this spot, because I have enough minerals to pump out a huge army from my factories, and then I have the ghosts in there that really let the push advance forward quite aggressively. I don't have to move back and forth from the carriers. I can move back and lock down and then continue to move forward, because I have all these extra vultures. That's going to allow me to deal with the ground army pretty effectively. Another way to put it is that carriers themselves are okay. They're pretty good, but it's carriers and ground units that really screw Terran up. I think Stork vs. Flash on Heartbreak Ridge is an amazing example of that. How Stork gets carriers and Flash makes a ton of Goliaths, and then Stork just gets a bunch of ground units again and walks in and kills them. So in that regard, I would say it requires a lot of resources to do. And also I think that's a good example. The Ghost Goliath against carriers. It's a great example of, I'm going to start getting ghosts for lockdown for the shuttles, and then if later on he goes carriers, I have that tool at my disposal. So the last thing I want to say on that is, as long as you can go ghosts and do pretty damn good without him going carriers, I like it. I dig it. So I'm just going to take one more question. The Flam says, how effective would throwing in a couple of firebats and medics to defend the tanks versus the zealots? So now, really what in my eyes that comes down to is a question of, do I want to spend gas to defend the zealots, which would be the firebats, which are gas units to defend the zealots, or do I want minerals to defend against the zealots by spending on vultures? And I think a lot of Terran players are going to prefer the vultures just because they are a mineral solution to the zealot problem. And then all the gas can be spent on getting, a medic and an upgrade or so. And then a lot of the armory upgrades and a lot of the extra factories, that's where the gas is going. A lot of Terran players don't really want to get a whole bunch of firebats and medics to deal with the zealots. Which is kind of interesting, because it makes me feel like in this theoretical map I'm thinking of right now, where you end up with a lot of gas, like let's say you have 2 or 3 geysers in your main, it might be a little bit better to go firebat medic tank than it would be to go vulture tank, because economically we have fewer minerals and more gas, and a bunch of firebats and medics accomplish basically the same thing as vultures, except they require a lot of gas. So just the sorts of things that you want to think about. Always sort of rebalancing how your minerals and your gas are being spent. So you know what? That is going to wrap up Day 9 Daily number 66. And tomorrow is Day 9 Daily number 67, where we're going to be looking at a StarCraft 2 game. So you should tell everyone that you've ever met in your entire life to check it out. We're going to be thinking about tools that we've learned in StarCraft 1 and how they apply to the StarCraft 2 game. And that is going to be that. So thank you very much, everyone, for checking it out. And the sweet-ass BGH game from yesterday will be going up on demand right now. Take it easy, guys, and go watch the MSL.